Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Wealth Conversation podcast with me, Tsitsi Mutiti. I guide high-achieving women on their journey to build lasting wealth so they can prepare for an abundant future in every area of their life. I hope that today's episode will help you to transform your relationship with money so you can make the choices that will enable you to create the opportunities and lasting wealth that you desire. Let's get straight into this week's episode. In the run-up to the one-year anniversary of the Wealth Conversation podcast, I am celebrating the guest episodes that have had the most downloads so far across the various platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, and YouTube. And I hope that these episodes, which you clearly loved, will encourage you again to create the wealth that you truly desire in every area of your life. The first episode in the anniversary series is episode 4. My guest for this episode was Thomas-Humphreys. Catherine and I discussed how we all have the ability to influence our money habits and mindset. Hi, Catherine.
Hi there, Sitsi.
So good to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining us.
So welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So please, could you tell us who is Catherine Thomas-Humphreys?
I am Catherine. In terms of my job, I'm a financial advisor and more recently certified as a financial coach. So I'm turning more of my attention now to that money coaching side of my job, which I've just actually left my previous employment to commit full time to working toward that, which is really exciting. Catherine is also a mum. I've got 3 wonderful children. I'm a wife to Kevin, who is extremely supportive of this recent change. Excuse me. And then when I'm not being mum or financial advisor or coach, you'll usually find me either in the garden or swimming, usually across a lake, in a river, anywhere where I can just get away from things and no one calls your name in the middle of a lake.
I love that. No one calls your name in the middle of the lake.
Nobody says, Mom.
Sounds so perfect. I think I'll be joining you on those swimming trips.
Please do.
In the middle of the lake. Right. So, Catherine, you are the founder of the Finfluencer. Tell us a bit about that.
The Finfluencer is my new financial coaching business. Well, I know the name came about really because I've discovered that each one of us as individuals can change and influence our own financial situation. So in the context of the Finfluencer, I'm really talking about my clients, that each one of us is their own greatest influencer. I've come from a background which hasn't always been financially affluent. I've struggled sort of during my early 20s, excuse me, Sitsi, raising my children. I did part of that on my own. So I think there was a lot of what we would know as a scarcity mindset, that this idea that the money's going to run out or there isn't enough or that you have to work very hard for it. And I think I used to perceive that money was a very external force, that I had to do something quite uphill in order to get it. And then it seemed to go as quickly as it arrived. And what I learned over the years, through my own experience, through being a financial advisor, and once again through the financial coaching, is that that's not the case at all. That each one of us actually can shift and change and influence what we do with our money and how we work with our money. And I find that really empowering. And that's really what I'm trying to share with my clients, that we tend to look to other people for a solution, but the solution is within us. And also influence to me is a much gentler word. That background I described makes for me budgeting and control and management. They're all quite hard words. And really money to me now, I understand it's flowing, it's easy. And therefore influence to me was just a far gentler but still powerful word.
That's amazing, Catherine. And a lot of what you've said resonated with me because I think I've got to this point in my life, where I'm helping people through coaching, through the work I do in wealth management, after having realized that I can actually, as you put it, influence my money. I can influence the way I think, the way I feel about money. like you, for a long time, I actually felt that I needed somebody else to do the thing, do the influencing of the money, or it wasn't me, it was these external forces that were causing me not to have enough money, or just not being able to make those right decisions, whatever they were. But actually the root was me.
Absolutely. And I think because we met on the same course, and it's been an absolute delight knowing you ever since. But I think what we both found together is that these younger memories and the experience from our families have a much stronger, quiet influence on us than we realise. And when we start to shine a light on that and uncover that and explore that, suddenly we've got the ability to reshift and reframe and change that to something positive. And that's really what's helped me decide to move from pure financial advice into really working with money coaching, because it is so transformational. You don't have to have a lot of money, but if you can go through that process to understand you in your relationship with money and the emotions, the practical side's useful, but put the two together and the change that we can have on individuals' lives is absolutely mammoth. So I would rather work, I think we call it the advice gap in our industry, that people between sort of having debt and having a lot of money and benefiting from advice, that's not a gap, that's a chasm. If you look at the numbers in the UK who aren't being supported and aren't being helped to understand their money relationship and understand those practical skills. And if we can impart that and our knowledge with people, I think the changes for individuals, families and communities will be immense.
I couldn't agree with you more, Catherine. I take it as far as even saying that the chasm goes across all groups of people, from the people who are struggling with whether it's having a little bit of money or they're in debt, to even the ultra wealthy, because it's that thing that we don't understand our impact on our money, the influence we have on our money. So I believe it's a bit of a false security thing that we believe the more money we have, the better we are at managing it. In my experience, I've seen people who had the same mindset as I did when I was struggling with my money, and they've got lots of money. And that was something that I used to struggle with. Like, how come they feel that they don't deserve money? Because I didn't feel like I deserved money, and they've got loads of money. And it just boils down to that lack of self-knowledge, or not having had the time to spend understanding ourselves. Yeah, what you were talking about earlier, was, basically answered what I was going to ask you next, which was, what do you believe are the roots or the key influences on most of our habits?
So certainly a key one is that childhood experience. And I think psychology tends to point to around about the age of 7 that's most influenced. And I find when I work with clients, either advice clients or coaching clients, whilst coaching is a very forward action, understanding a little bit of how those habits have come about is key to that. But the memories that they tend to come up with tend to be in the range of 6, 7, 8 years old. And we pick up the language of our parents, we see the actions. For me, it was very much money doesn't grow on trees. I used to watch my dad budget once a month. He was a nurse, and nurses' pay has never been very good. But you take that back sort of 40 plus years, as the main breadwinner on a nurse, it was a very tight family. We never went without, because my dad and my mum worked together very, very hard to make sure that it didn't run out. But you always knew that there was never any extra. Now, it took me a long time to realise that I was repeating that pattern of there isn't any extra, it's going to run out, or it doesn't grow on trees. And I hear that a lot. So I think that the childhood experience, and I've seen quite a lot of evidence, I guess, for want of a better term, that what my parents, I learned from my parents, they may have learned from their parents, and so forth and so on. So it's a real opportunity for that awareness, not only to reshape our own habits, but then to not let that old habit continue down with the next generation. That's not the only thing. I think there'll be key moments maybe sort of financial trauma. So, for example, I got divorced. That was a really emotional, financial, traumatic situation for me, and I learned an awful lot from it. In fact, that was the key decision for me to actually go and train to be a financial advisor. So I think those traumas will add to the childhood memories. And then there'll be other people that influence us as well. So if you've been married or you're single and now you're remarried, you potentially have 3 or 4 influences on that one money relationship. It's not just as straightforward as one child growing up with no other influences. And again, I look at my brother and sister, exactly the same scenario we grew up in, yet we all behave very differently with money. So it isn't that we see it and we replicate it, we see it and it influences us on top of other things to create those habits from there.
That is so true. The one thing that really stuck in my mind when we were going through the financial coaching training was the fact that each individual gives a certain experience or a certain saying that they've heard their own meaning. So you can hear the same thing or see the same thing as this at the same time as somebody else, whether it's a brother or sister or a parent or just somebody else, in general. See all of that and hear it all at the same time, but individually give it your own meaning. And this is why we see siblings handling money in different ways, even though they grew up in the same households.
In-house, yeah. I think it's like everything, isn't it? When you first see it, you see it through your perspective. And then at the point that you have seen it, you have a choice. And your first choice is the same or the opposite. And then you get all the variations in between after that. So yeah, my sister and I think in particular took totally opposite approaches. But then life's kind of brought us back round sort of 40 years later to much more similar approach. But certainly initially we seem to respond extremely differently to almost the same set of circumstances.
Yeah, I find that so fascinating. I think I'm going to spend a bit more time looking into it because it's mind-blowing how you can be experiencing the same thing, but actually internalize it completely differently to the other person.
Yeah.
You talked about when you got divorced, that it was quite traumatic for you and it had an impact on your finances and also what you decided to do later on in terms of your career. I wanted you to just share with us one moment, or if there's a few, that really influenced your money habits and how they actually influenced your money habits.
Yeah, I think there were a lot, but the key one, which was almost a decision for me. And so when I was getting divorced, I had an awful lot of guilt and shame about how we split the financial assets. So I'd taken a good 10 years out of my career. We'd made that decision as a family to raise what was my middle son at the time, which meant that I left a defined benefit pension scheme within that particular period of time, whereas my husband was still within that scheme. So during our marriage and our family, whilst we'd made this joint decision, financially, he was contributing to a pension and the employer was, whereas I was missing out. Now, I found it difficult going to the solicitor and saying that we've got to share this because it felt very much like this was his. But at the same time, it didn't seem to acknowledge the fact that I had missed out as a result of the joint decision. And the feeling of guilt and shame was really very, very strong. I remember this solicitor saying you need to go and see a financial advisor because it was a final salary defined benefit pension. I felt judged. I felt embarrassed. I felt like I was taking something that wasn't mine, even though I was obviously needing to provide for myself and our family. And I found it extremely difficult. I nearly walked away, not asking for any of it at all, other than the solicitor was going, you're getting divorced, you've both paid into this relationship. And I felt the financial advisor really, I'm going to be really careful about how I say this because I have since learned from meeting thousands of financial advisors that this was really my perception. I felt the financial advisor was just there for his share of the fee. I didn't feel he connected with me. I didn't feel he cared about me. I didn't feel like he actually taught me about the pension. So I taught myself. So that was the kind of insight. I thought, actually, I've learned a lot. And I've always been very pragmatic, partly down to my dad again in the budgeting. And people naturally came to me in the family and friends to ask how to fix things, or what did they need to do to improve their credit score. It was just general questions that I seemed to attract those type. I thought, if women and maybe even men are feeling like this in front of a financial advisor, that's wrong. To me, advice is about people, and relationships are founded on trust. And you need to have that focus on the person and win their trust and know that they've got an advocate for them in a difficult financial situation. So when I came through that, not only had I learned a lot about pensions, I decided then that there was, from my perspective, a real need for a human connection in financial advice. And as I say, since then, every financial advisor, all bar a few I can count on one hand, have demonstrated that our industry is actually extremely human, very, very caring, and perhaps we're a little misrepresented sometimes with the Daily Mail articles.
I couldn't agree more with that. Yeah, it's always the bad news that people remember, and not the good news. And there are, I think, hundreds and thousands of amazing advisors out there who are just, helping families and individuals navigate sometimes complicated scenarios, also teaching, the younger generation as well, and it is a privilege to be a part of the industry. And I think also with this financial coaching that we are stepping into as well, it's phenomenal to be a part of this movement that is really there to support and build individuals, families, and communities as well.
Yeah, I think, and I love what you're doing with the wealth conversation, that it brings conversations to people. It opens up the channel to have conversations and talking about money more openly, just to kind of break down some of the taboos that we've got in our culture. And I would love to see more good news stories from the advice industry, because I think there's a lot of people working extremely hard with good hearts for the right outcomes for people. So yeah, maybe we need a podcast somewhere else celebrating all the kind of advisor successes.
That is so true. Yeah. Whoever's listening to this and thinks that they can do that, feel free and get in touch with us.
I would listen.
Yeah. And invite us on your podcast as well.
Oh, yeah.
I'd love you to just share with us a bit about the Finfluencer, right? What is the ethos behind it? And also, what are the steps that people should take to become their own Finfluencers?
So I think the main ethos behind it is to empower the person that I'm working with. I want them to leave our relationship, if you like, whether it's a one-to-one or a workshop or a group coaching, feeling that they are in control or influencing, and that they trust themselves and have the tools to make more money, earn more money, take care of the money and grow. The reason that we're working on the finances isn't really, from my perspective, to do with the money. Again, this comes from my own experience, and I've seen it in some of my earlier jobs that you do when you're younger, is if you can get to a position where you're not worrying about money, where it's not a negative kind of drain. I don't think there's a pound sign number that brings happiness, but there's definitely a point where you go from being worried to it being no longer a worry. And then your focus can change onto who you are and why you are and what you want to do. So if you recall Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this very bottom security, psychological needs, if you can just address that feeling, as individuals, we can be whoever it is that we want to be and focus on what we want. So the finances, to me, is the part that enables and empowers each of us to then step forward into being who it is that we want to be. In terms of the steps, at the moment I do one-to-one coaching, and I'm just about to launch my group coaching course at the beginning of September. I did a beta test earlier this year, which I really enjoyed. And what was lovely about that is the group supporting each other. There's a dynamic people get from not feeling like they're alone. And working together, that as a one-to-one isn't quite the same. You get something different from the one-to-one, which is a lot of very personalised attention and tailored to your needs. So the group coaching will start in September, and the structure behind that is like a 6-step process, really. It's where do you want to be, and where are we? Why are we where we are? And that's perhaps when we take a look back at the childhood and the memories and the things that have shaped us. And then what habits do we need in order to get to that first step again, which is where we want to be. So these 3 emotions, thoughts, habits work to kind of feed each other. And our tendency is to want to stay there because that feels safe. So it's for me to make you feel safe enough that we can make a shift and make a change. Some of the feedback I've had from my clients is I'm very much like a personal trainer. So if you were setting your goal to run a marathon, you know what your goal is and you know when it is. And then we're breaking it down into small steps. And a lot of that training isn't just physical, it's overcoming the mindset, the self-belief, and I don't want to do it today, but we still got to do it, and breaking it into small steps.
The journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you've spoken about the group coaching, which is another thing that I've been working on, also having a group coaching program, because the one thing I took from what you said about the group coaching is the support that people get from each other. And I think that conversation, which is so important, being able to talk about things. And one thing that comes from conversation, which is why I called my business The Wealth Conversation, is you realize that actually that thing that you were so afraid of is not as bad as your brain is making it out to be.
It's a bit like when you have a secret, isn't it? It's far more powerful. It's got a lot more energy about it because you're holding it to yourself. And I think we don't comfortably talk about money. So therefore we do feel as individuals that we're the only ones who perhaps are in debt, or the only ones who spend online late at night, or the only ones that can't save. There's not a lot of comfortable places to go and say, hey, so you get Alcoholics Anonymous, but you don't sort of get support financially. So you asked earlier about some of the ethos behind the Finfluencer, and one of the value statements that I've got is that no one should face financial fear alone. And I think it's the aloneness that adds to the fear. So when I ran the group beta course earlier this year, she's very young compared to me. Everybody seems young. I don't know whether you're having that as well. But to her, the feedback was that she suddenly didn't feel alone with this spending habit, that actually that meant that she could do something about it. So she didn't have to beat herself up. She didn't have to be guilty. She didn't have to sort of feel it was out of control. Now, she wouldn't have known that had she not been within that group dynamic. So to know that we're not alone, there are only a set number of feelings. They may lead to different thoughts, but there's also not many dissimilar habits you and I see over and over again. So none of us are alone with our financial habits. And I think being supported by a group and knowing you're not alone is really powerful.
It certainly is. Now, Catherine, you've got this amazing tool called the Family Money Tree. And when you said that one of the things that you remember about growing up was people saying money doesn't grow on trees, I was like, oh, and she's got the Family Money Tree. So yeah, what is the Family Money Tree all about? How does it work?
So it really is to go through that process of identifying who's been a key influencer for you, and what is it that they've done or said, or how you felt about what they've done or said, that is influencing you. So it's structured much like a family tree. And what you do is you take some time to go through the exercise, perhaps from grandparents, definitely parents or step-parents, or any sort of adult influencer you had as a child. And you're just trying to record on the tool the things they used to say, or habits you witnessed them having. So when I did mine, for example, I remember certain things that my grandma used to do. I wouldn't have necessarily known that she'd said anything, but then I could see that that's my grandma used to hide money under the sofa. So, that's a scarcity mindset also. So you work through the upper generations, and then through any other key adult influences. So for me, it was my current husband, but also my ex-husband, because those were two quite strong influences. You start to pick out what you're doing that's either the same or is a reaction to it. So it's really a sort of insightful tool for people or us to get to know who's shaping us, who's influencing us, in what way have they influenced us. And then you can have, well, what do I want to keep? What do I want to change? What do I want to add more of? What do I want to let go of? So it's bringing curiosity and exploration to why we have the habits that we do, so we can therefore make a change to what we want to make a change to.
And I love the bit about what do you want to keep, what's no longer serving you, because I really feel it does give you that feeling of ownership. And as you call it, influence. Now you can influence. That I'm trying not to say control.
I think it's that awareness, isn't it? Because by looking back, as soon as you go to do it again, it's like, oh, hang on a second. And it's just a pause. It's an opportunity to influence or change, rather than just repeat. So a habit is a behavior. It's not necessarily a good or bad habit. It's a set of behaviors. And is it serving you? Is it going to help you get to where you want to go? And once that awareness comes in, I often describe it as someone turning the light on, that you don't unsee it. You know it then, and it just be a little nudge sometimes, or a pause until a new habit creates. But yeah, that awareness is really quite key to, and the exploring to then how we move forward.
And it is exactly as you said, just it's about being aware. It's not about saying that is a bad habit, stop it completely, because that causes a lot of resistance. That causes a lot of sometimes pain, anger, resentment, when actually it's not a case of stopping it completely, but it's about being aware and then understanding how you can adjust your behavior, adjust your thinking. So a simple thing for people who may feel that they spend a lot of money unnecessarily, that trick of put what you want in the basket and then wait 48 hours and go back to the basket.
So you got me all excited then, because spending isn't bad. And I think sometimes we miss that saving and investing is also part of spending. We're not saving to never spend it. We're not investing to never spend it. It'll be there for spend for another time, and to grow in the meantime. I ask a question, or I get my clients to ask themselves a question. The question is along the lines of, does this take me closer to or further away from X? I ask myself that. I spend a whole lot less on things that no longer sit with my values and my goals. I mean, that totally misses out all of the emotional triggers for spending. I know there's more to it than that, but that point of awareness with a sense check gives you a choice then, doesn't it? Instead of it just being a habit and response.
Completely agree, Catherine. I mean, we could go on and on.
We can, yeah. You and I have that about us.
We could go on and on. And, I actually absolutely love the angle you've taken with supporting people and giving them the ability to influence not just their current finances, but future finances. So I just love the whole Finfluencer ethos, and I can't wait to see what other programs you bring out after you've launched this group program fully. So Catherine, there's one question that I ask all my interviewees, and I hope you're ready for it.
Go for it.
Okay, so as you know, I believe that in order to create true wealth, we must all be clear on what wealth means to us in each area of our lives. Mm-hmm. So in a few words, please could you tell us what wealth means to you in terms of physical well-being, mental well-being, spiritual well-being, social well-being, and financial well-being?
Wow. Great question, Sitsi. And I'm glad that you asked all 5 components together. So to me, wealth is very much like health. It's having that optimum balance where you have choices, and that lack of wealth or health isn't affecting the choices that you're having. And the reason I'm glad you asked them all together is I used to be, I trained back in the early 2000s as a yoga teacher. And one of the premises, for want of a better term, is that we're not separate. So our spiritual self isn't separate from our physical self or our mental self, and that we are a whole. Holistic, I think, would be the term. So for me, I think that they do all need addressing together, that we're not just a body that transports a mind around. For me, I am quite spiritual. I'm not religious. I think that's a conversation for you and I for another day. So for me, it would be the balance of all of those 5 aspects that you've asked about. And that balance comes through, as in it's not lacking. So if you have that optimum physical health, optimum mental health, or optimum spiritual health, that to me is wealth, because it's not taking something away from you, which would then affect or bring out of balance those 5 aspects. I think it's really interesting. You also asked with those 5, the financial, but the social one in particular. So we're obviously coming now out of lockdown, where you could argue that we've been socially isolated. And I know that a lot of people I've spoken to have found that has affected their physical health and their mental health and also their spiritual health. So it just goes to show that we are all connected, and that the social element is really important to our overall health. So, and you and I met during lockdown, so we've never physically met, yet Zoom and the social connection has really brought people together. So I think we need all 5 elements. I think the financial one goes without saying, but to me, wealth is very much that balance of holistic health on all of those areas. Does that make sense, Titsi?
It makes complete sense, Catherine, and I love that. As you were talking, I wrote down, we are a whole. We tend to forget that, that if one area of our life is out of balance, it does have an impact on the rest of our lives. And you've illustrated that so well with the social well-being. Not being able to go out, not being able to see people has really impacted the physical, mental, and spiritual, and for some even the financial well-being. Yeah. So thank you so much for that. That's so many gems in that. Now, how can listeners get in touch with you, Catherine, if they want to work with you or even get the family money tree?
Yes, I think the easiest place for them would be my website, which is as per the name, so www.thefinfluencer.co.uk. From there, they'll be able to sign up to my mailing list, and there'll be information on the group coaching course, or they can download the family money tree and just spend some time exploring and becoming aware of their own influences. And there'll also be all of my social media handles there, so please do feel free to reach out, ask any questions, or get in touch. I'd love to speak to you.
Fantastic, Catherine. And I will put your website address in the show notes. So be sure to check the show notes if you want to get in touch with Catherine. Thank you so much, Catherine, for agreeing to this interview. I have a feeling, I know I say this about all my interviews, but I have a feeling you will be one of those who I'll be calling back over and over again, because I believe we've just literally scratched the surface of what you have to share with us in terms of how we can be our own Finfluencers.
I would be delighted, Sitsi, for you at any time.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Connect with me at The Wealth Conversation on Facebook and Instagram so we can continue the discussion. Also, if you enjoy tuning into this podcast, make sure to leave a rating and review everywhere you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Until next week, Stay focused on becoming the designer of your financial future.